Hello everyone, welcome to the Modern Monarchist show. We are back and better than ever, back from bannings and back from all types of technological disabilities. We're back with the Crusade story. We're advancing onwards throughout the history of the First Crusade, and we're very excited to present this to you. So you see, in the middle of May, the Crusaders were making their way south of Beirut, through a nice pine forest. You can imagine they were enjoying the smells of the pine trees after experiencing great desert expanses and the steppes and the plains, devoid of that beautiful musk that we know pine trees have. And they were taking the road south that led them along the coastline. And it filed down the coastline between the mountains and between the sea, a beautiful road. Now this was not the army that had been encamped at Nicaea. At Nicaea, few years past, it seemed like generations for many of these crusaders who had spent years on the road. The army numbered 150,000 souls at Nicaea. Now there were only 30,000. And out of these 30,000, perhaps less than half were soldiers. So this was no longer a military expedition. This is a shambling but devoted pilgrimage. And as they make their way south, and they start seeing the coastline from the mountains of Lebanon, they expected to see ships, but there were no ships there. No European ships. And there's a reason for this, is because the English and the Danes and the northern Germans who had supplied them with boats in the past through the port of Saint Simeon during the siege of Antioch had continued to go through Cyprus and had evaded the Egyptian galleys for the most part. But however, they had run their boats to their utter and total end. These boats were beyond repair, and the sailors would then accompany the Crusaders on the long walk. Now these Crusaders were mostly stocky, ruddy Englishmen or Danes, like I mentioned. They walked like sailors did, with a hobble and one foot seemingly shorter than the next. And it was quite a surprise that amongst all these ranks of Flemish and Germans and Franks, Provençals, and even Italians, to see these English and Danish pirates and seafarers and fishermen. Certainly, it's a rare combination to have Crusader pirates, but this is what they had with them. And as they took their journey south, they came across many old sites. Herod's baths, old Roman temples, the ruins of ancient Egyptian and Roman columns. This was truly, it seemed like a graveyard of civilizations. Now, I know this is used for Afghanistan, but I mean graveyard as in carrying the bones of ancient cities. Now, these cities still remained to some degree. There was Tyre and Sidon, Sidon positioned in the sea so much that only a beautiful glittering bridge connected it to its twin city of Tyre. The Crusaders passed this by. They had no means to siege any cities, nor did they care to, and as they came along the coast, some barons even said, perhaps we should continue along the coast and take Cairo. Cairo is the capital of Islamic Egypt. This was immediately downvoted. No one wanted to do that. They wanted to go to Jerusalem. And it came to be more and more to the fact that as they came further south through Lebanon, they came across many priests and religious. These were shy, bearded men, and they told them stories. They said they were Maronites. These Maronites were religious men. They were Eastern Rite Christians, but they believed in the papacy, which is quite rare to be an Eastern Rite Christian at that time. They were very nice and kind, and they told them of the privations the Muslims had put them through. Because, let me remind you, this whole area has been abandoned by Muslims. There's no Muslims here. They've all fled. They've all gone to Jerusalem or Damascus, and this is all abandoned territory besides the Syrians and a few others you're going to meet shortly. The Syrians said the Muslims had treated them terribly. They put a tax on their holy images, and unless they paid this horrible tax, their images would be thrown into the ground, their eyes broken. Quite terrible. They said the Muslims had come and taken the fairest, the most handsome boys and put them into brothels. What a terrible fate for boys. And had taken many of their young girls as well. These Maronites were overjoyed, and they showed the Crusaders various things they could eat, and one of these was zucra, long stem-like plant, and the Crusaders would break them open and drink the honey-like substance in between. Sticky goodness, you know. This was their version of chips and dip, you know, locusts and zucra. And they would eat this, they'd break it open, but the Crusaders were shown by these Maronites, by these Syrian Christians, that if you broke it open and ground it, almost like into a sugar or paste, you could put it into milk, you could put it into water, and it would sweeten things and it cause strength and energy. It's kind of like a form of sugar. You can take zucra tablets until to this day. It's very healthy, very good for you, provides healthy sugar, and the Crusaders were happy to find this source of energy and pleasure. The Maronites were overjoyed, however they were cautious, and they told the Crusaders perhaps they should skirt around further inland, where they'd find more water and better safety if they were attacked. Now the Crusaders were not thinking of military strategy, they were thinking in terms of their religiosity and how quickly it would take them on this road to reach Jerusalem. And if they followed the Maronites' advice, they would be taking detours. They're sick of detours, remember? That's why they didn't want to take Cairo. So the Crusaders, they eat the zucra, they spend 2 days on these nice plains, these hot plains that they've reached, and they're spending Pentecost there when they see a bird. It's a pigeon. They didn't know what carrier pigeons were. And this pigeon's flying overhead, and a hawk takes it, kills the pigeon, the bird falls to the ground, and they see on the bird's drumstick, on the bird's like claw, they see a little ring with paper in it, and they open it up. They didn't even know what paper was. They didn't even know what messenger birds were. Most of them hadn't seen paper, and they looked at it. It was written in Arabic. And it was from the lord of a city to another lord saying, basically in Arabic, a pack of wild dogs. He didn't say a pack, he said a race of wild dogs has come into our lands. Let us treat them as so and harry them. Basically saying, let's kill these pack of dogs, this race of dogs. The Crusaders see this and they're amazed. They think it's a gift of God to deliver them the plans of their enemy. And as they disembark and start heading even further south, they are attacked by Muslim cavalry. The Muslim cavalry start slaughtering the stragglers in the back and start picking off those that are tarrying too far on the sides of the caravan. However, Raymond, the hawkish old provincial lord of Toulouse, is waiting in the back with his men. He has had many years to acquaint himself with the barbarities and the certain strategies that these Turks employ. Hit-and-run tactics, running away from armored men, shooting them with arrows. So he hides behind a gully or a ditch or some kind of geographic position where they can't see him. And as the first Turkish raiders pass him by on their horses, their light horses, he breaks out with his heavy cavalry and cuts the raiding party in two, scattering them and driving them from the field. Raymond is very victorious, and he's encouraged by this victory so much that when some of his supporters say, "Lord, we need to go further inland to find water," he says, "No, God will provide." Raymond was right. God did provide. And as they reach a ravine, they find pools. Not exactly a river proper, but they find pools of fresh, clear mountain water that had come down from the mountains. And the men enjoyed this, and they drank from it, and they got all their needs met because they met another plain, a plain of Ramla. Not Ramallah, Ramla. And this plain had dates and figs and nice things for them to eat. It was sun-baked, but it was all things they needed. Their skins were full of water, their bellies were slightly full of some nice fruit, and despite the flies and the gnats that are so heavy in this period of heavy May, and this time of the world, biting them and itching them, they were still happy to be approaching the Holy Land. They had reached Palestine, northern Israel in modern day terms, and they reached one of the first cities of Israel, Ramla. And they could see it from a distance. There was no sight of greenery. This early spring heat had baked everything. You probably were seeing mirages along these plains. And the city looked abandoned. As they passed by it, swords drawn in case of an ambush, they saw that the hotels and houses of the Muslims were left abandoned, their rugs still on the floor. Now, these Muslims had probably gone to someplace safe, and we'll see that. However, when they reach the center of the city, they see a certain group of people that history had forgotten about, the Samaritans. Remember when the tribes had split after the time of Solomon? 10 tribes became heretical according to old Jewish law. They became the Samaritans. The other two, the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, remained loyal to the law. These were the remnants of those 10 tribes, the Samaritans. We know them in the Bible as the Good Samaritans. We know them as the woman at the well was a Samaritan. They are well known, but no one had remembered they even existed. These Samaritans greeted the Crusaders royally, gave them water to drink, fresh robes and supplies, and showed them all around Ramla. When the Crusaders reached a mosque, they found that it had been burned down, its timbers falling away. And here it was told by some of the local Syrian native guides that this was the place where St. George was buried, the patron saint of soldiers, the one who slew the dragon. And they said he was buried underneath the marble of the altar. They believed this, and they rechristened it as a church, the very first church of the Holy Land to be rechristened from a mosque to a church. They left a bishop there with donkeys and supplies and servants and money, the very first bishopric to be established in the Holy Land. They did this, and they rested a little while. But one of them wanted to continue ahead on his journey. This was the brave Norman knight Tancred de Hauteville. He was Bohemond's nephew. We've met him several times. He is a man of great energy, whereas lords would sometimes be hesitant to attack in the most dangerous situations. Tancred would ride ahead at a moment's notice in the most sudden outbursts of vigor, and he would rush into danger wholeheartedly. Tancred came up with this in his mind. He said, "I will not allow the churches of Bethlehem and of the places of Christ's infancy and youth to be destroyed by the Muslims like the church of St. George was. I will not have their timbers destroyed." He was fearing this because he knew the Muslims were preparing for a siege. They had destroyed these churches, anything with timber, they destroyed it so it could not be used in siege weapons. They were probably filling in wells and cisterns of water so the Crusaders couldn't drink from them. He knew this. So, in the middle of the night, it was around midnight, Tancred arose from his couch and he got dressed in his chainmail and his helmet. He put the white coverings, the cloth that the Arabs used to protect their helmets and armor from getting overheated with the sun. and he ordered the men and squires of his pavilion out to meet him. They met him and several other groups of knights. This had been probably a preordained meeting in the midnight. They got their charger horses, resplendent in their finest pageantry, and there were about 100 of these young youths. They were similar to Tancred, hot-blooded and full of vigor, good Christian men, with their long, golden Norman hair braided in the back, and without a moment's notice, Tancred said, "On to Jerusalem," and they rode to Jerusalem. But meanwhile, what he really wanted was to go to Bethlehem. Tancred's men rode like a white-hot comet through the night, and in the morning they saw a sight. They saw the sight of a small town, and this is believed to have been Bethlehem, for there was the only big standing edifice in the whole town, the Church of Bethlehem, and the Christians there were amazed at what they saw. Noble knights bearing the Red Cross of Normandy. They had not seen that cross in so long. It was the happiest days of days they had experienced. The women got on their holiday gowns. The men put on their finest clothes and washed their hands and beards, preparing to greet these Christians. And the Christian knights under Tancred reacted with such a, party-like atmosphere, you could say. They were so excited that there were people excited to see them. They made their visits and pilgrimage to the church there in Bethlehem. And Tancred greeted the hermits and the monks there. And the hermits and monks couldn't believe their eyes. They had not seen Christians in so long. They feared that the Muslims, they were behind Muslim lines, the Normans were, they feared the Muslims would come up and envelop them and kill all these brave 100 Norman knights. But that did not happen through the grace of God. After a little bit of partying, Tancred left a guard of swordsmen to protect the entrance of the church, and he put his red banner over the city, a brave move. And he asked a local hermit and said, "Take me to Jerusalem." Now this was some madness reaching Tancred, because Tancred just 4 years prior to all of this had been living on Sicily, and he was noted to be very conceited, not willing to take risks for the church, but rather fighting and squabblings. However, he was one of the few lords who had picked up rather carefully the strategies of the Arabs and the strategies of the Turks. And he had done this carefully by studying their movements in Sicily and studying their movements during the Battle of Dorylaeum and Nicaea and Antioch. Tancred was perhaps the foil to Bohemond, because Bohemond was very aggressive, but he also was too aggressive to the point he was making himself more important than the divine mission. Bohemond was called the little god of the Christians by the Muslims, but Tancred was called the desert jinn, meaning the desert spirit or the desert demon. That's how scary he was. So Tancred rode into position with orders from this hermit, and the hermit put him up to the top of a mountain full of olive trees, which at the bottom had plains. It is believed today that Tancred walked upon the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives where Christ had his agony on the garden, where he bled, he sweated blood. Tancred was there watching the city, and he looked upon it, gathering information. He could not see from across the sun-baked ravines and plains between him and the city. He could not see any gates. He thought he could see one, but it was covered with rocks. And he saw a vast stream of bodies and horses and camels entering through what he appeared to be another gate. What he didn't know is that the Muslims had been filling in the wells outside of the city. They had been emptying and doing scorched earth tactics outside of the walls. And they were also kicking out all the Christians from Jerusalem, as many as they could, mostly the Christian men. They were also receiving Muslim immigrants and refugees from the other areas of southern Lebanon and northern Israel. Tancred saw all of this, and he wanted, and a fierce blood boiled in his heart. He wanted to attack, but he returned. He received the blessing of the hermit, this holy hermit whose mind must have been amazed by what he had seen. A Christian warrior had not been seen in Bethlehem in around 450 years, since the time of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was surely a miracle of God. As Tancred and his men waited for the Crusaders to come up with their larger army, the Muslims began furiously building siege works and earthenworks and all types of anti-offensive weapons and siege weapons on their walls. They were preparing for battle. They knew it was coming. As they did this, they could see from the walls a vast column of men, most assuredly Godfrey's men and Raymond's, coming up with their banners. Many were wearing black robes of the priests. Now these was not any normal army. This was a procession, a large column, knights walking besides the pilgrimagers, with their horses being dragged from the back. This was a religious march, and even the women were wearing the black robes of the religious. The Muslims didn't know how to defeat this army. This was the army that had finally, through disease and starvation, through death and privation, had reached the walls of Jerusalem. And there the Crusaders approached, a blur in the distance, but ever becoming more clear to those on the walls. Those on the walls knew that those next weeks between them would become ones of blood-filled rage and battle, destruction of the lives that they had known. This was the final clash of the First Crusade, so to say, the crash in which the broadsword of the Normans would break the scimitar of Islam. Jerusalem is a city, and like many cities, many people have lived there before. But unlike many cities, Jerusalem has seen the blood of thousands of people spilled. And Jerusalem itself never cried. Jerusalem is a hardened city. Christians, Jews, Muslims all have bled within its walls. Romans, Persians, Muslims, fire has met its stones. And still, the Wailing Wall is still there. The walls of Solomon, the Dome of the Rock. Still the sepulchre of Christ stands, buried underneath years and years of Muslim oppression and rule. But no longer. Jerusalem is primed to fall. And there we'll pick you up in the next episode. In the next episode on Monday, we will have a wonderful discussion on the beginning, part 1 of part 2, of our epic retelling of the siege and fall of Jerusalem in 1099. Thank you so much for listening to this on live or replay. We just did 20 minutes of straight up history, non-stop. You guys, I don't know where you're going to find such riveting history. Apparently the audio has an echo. I gotta make sure if this is true. Hold on. Has an echo? I gotta make sure if this is true. Yeah, it is kind of true. Is it annoying? Is it bad? I can hear it a little bit. I gotta make sure if this is true. Yeah, it is kind of true. Is it annoying? Is it bad? I'll try to work on it, okay? Right now, though, I gotta make sure if this is true. I'll fix it, okay? But yeah, all things in good time, right? Let me check my audio settings real quick. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I will get it fixed, though. I will get it fixed, that I promise you. You know, every show that we do, it's always something new we're fixing. Always something new. But we're working there, guys. We're working there. Thanks for hopping on. Dank Frank says, jolly good show. Jolly good. I hope you watch the replay. I'll put a timestamp where the history part ends. So now we do. So it's not that bad, but I'll get it fixed. I'll get this echo fixed. But since it's Friday, I thought we'd just do a little more casual, a little more conversational-like end of the show. Maybe we could talk about today in history. You know, every day of history, February 4th, let's say, has many interesting things that have occurred on it. Every single day is packed with so many nuggets of truth and meaning. Every day has a story to tell. Today, King Richard I, in 1194, was freed from captivity. Now that's the third crusade. We're not going to cover every crusade, okay? You don't have to suffer through me going autistically about the crusade. But King Richard I was an amazing king, the lion-hearted. And he had been betrayed by his fellow crusader king, the King of France, King Philip. And he had worked with his brother, King John, to make sure that Richard never returned from the crusade. King Richard was kidnapped. He was waylaid on the crusade. It was quite bad. But that's part of today in history. Sad thing, you know. It's a sad thing that such a good king who was very noble in the art of warfare. And he was. We'll talk about his deeds at a later date. I just don't want to spoil every single good conversation. But King Richard was militarily successful over Saladin. If he just had more men, he could have won the Third Crusade. But Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, who was in his 70s, he drowned after cleaning house in modern-day Turkey. Very sad. And then, of course, the French king wanted to go back to France so he could take some of King Richard's northern French properties. Such terrible stuff. You know what else happened today? In 1899, American troops and Filipino troops started firing on each other. And that was in the capital. Now, this is quite a problem. Some people think that the Philippine-American War is a precursor to Vietnam because there were similar tactics used by the insurgents, by the guerrillas. The Filipinos were fighting in that tropical area, and America got involved in the Spanish-Filipino War, and then America was attacked by the Filipinos. This war is seen as a precursor because it did involve guerrilla warfare atrocities on both sides. However, here's the deal. America won because they wanted to win. Primarily. They wanted to win the war. In Vietnam, the government did not want to win the war. It appeared to be, if we really wanted to win, we would have been playing dirty. Hell, we played dirty in World War II, right? We played dirty in World War I. In World War II, we firebombed like Dresden, okay? We bombed Japan. Like, we didn't care about anything. But when communism was attacking us, we had to put on the facade of like we opposed it. Because I do believe that the 1950s Red Scare and McCarthyism was actually correct. There were so many communists in the government and in Hollywood. None of them actually had any interference with after the 50s. They rose right to power just as easily. But the 50s was the last time America would ever really try to rout out communism in its ranks. And afterwards, it's like we had to put on the facade of opposing it, but then we never really tried to defeat it. And I believe if we had gone balls to the walls in Vietnam like we had done against Japan and against Germany, things would have been so much different. In the Philippines, in the 1890s and early 1900s, that war lasted many years. But we won. We won because we put in effort. Effort. Our leadership actually wasn't scared of having to do some things to win. And in war, you have to do some things. Not all those things are approved by the Geneva Convention. It's war. It's total. Warfare isn't as chivalrous as it used to be. The Napoleonic era broke the chivalry in war. During that war, citizens would start getting attacked. Very sad. Non-combatants. Very sad. But we could have won Vietnam. We never should have entered in the first place, but since we entered, we should have won, right? It's only natural. What else happened today? In 1909, California law segregates Caucasian children from Japanese school children. Ooh, how terrible, right? How terrible. You know, San Francisco became the fourth Californian city to recognize that it was racist towards Chinese. They're not Japanese, but it was racist towards Chinese. This was just recently in the news. It's a shame, every single ethnicity then, I guess, deserves to have a badge in a Remembrance Day, Where's the crap the Polish got, The Polish got so much crap when they came to America because they were Catholic, because their language is so dense. Do you know that when the government was trying to infiltrate socialist groups in early America, when the Poles were here in the early 1900s, they would raid Polish neighborhoods and they would look in the books, socialist books, to see what their plans were. But not even the brightest government workers could read Polish or understand it. So amazing. I find that to be a thing of honor, a thing of pride. The government couldn't break us. And the WASP elite said the Polish are the hardest European ethnic group to meld and bring into our melting bowl. They're the hardest group. Hardest group. And that's true, because they said the Polish have their own culture. They have their own beliefs. They don't believe in Americanism. They don't believe in democracy, for the most part. They were Catholic. They had their priests. They had their schools. They viewed Protestant and American and Anglo-Saxon law as immoral. And they only followed it because it was the law of the land. They didn't follow it because it was just. So the Polish were onto some things very, very recently. And I think they're still wonderful people. I'm proud to be Polish. We got not only good food, everyone says they got good food. That's no excuse for diversity. They have a cool language. I could say some things. I could say, how are you in Polish? Jak się masz? What else can I say? Thank you, which is dziękuję. Hello is like cześć. Dzień dobry, which is like good morning. This is all Polish. Wish you guys would pick this up. Let's see what else happened today. French troops take the territories of Offenburg and Buhl as the Ruhr. Yeah, French troops occupied parts of Germany today after World War I, leading to hostilities which would cause World War II. DVN great books called Hollywood Party talks about the roots of communism in Hollywood starting in the early 1930s. Well, why don't we talk about why Hollywood was communist? It's because there were a lot of Jews in there. And as we know, there are two political representations of Judaism, and that's Zionism and communism. They're always kind of still competing. Communism is more East Coast. Zionism is more West Coast. That's kind of the demarcations. And that's the nature of it. The East Coast ones tend to be much more communist, and West Coast are Zionists. And they come together to, corrupt the masses, to infiltrate Hollywood. Hollywood was so Jewish from its inception. Dank Frank says St. Vladimir was so handsome and faithful. The daughter of the king that captured Vladimir wanted to marry him so much that she would rather die than not marry him. Slav power, am I right? That's good. Good to know. Yo, okay, we're back. Power goes out. It's like, well, if it's not the CEO of YouTube or Instagram trying to take down my channel, then it's gonna be my own house, am I right? And it's gonna be my own house. What a mess. I'll have to edit all this to get it back together again. What can I say? Life gives you curveballs, I guess your house just loses power. But no, we're back. We'll finish up the show. What a mess, though. I didn't even know what I was talking about earlier. I just don't want the power to control my life. I don't want this electricity to tell me what to do. And that's what it was telling me what to do. My goodness. Maybe I should just end the stream here. But no, I think it's important to keep going. I do want to sometimes go, hey, I've had enough. I've only been streaming 3 weeks. I'm like, internet bannings, electricity going down. But no, we are going to get through this.
We got so much more history we need to talk about. And I know you guys need to hear it. Hold on. Okay. Well, I think that about ends it. I had a good stream, guys. The history part was good. The history part is always good. And, despite this outage, I'm okay with that, right? We didn't have a power outage too early. Okay. Should be pretty good. Guys, yeah, I started talking about the Jews, so they turned off the juice, says DV. And yeah, maybe that's it, you know? They're on to me. They're on to me. You know what? It's kind of a badge of honor, if you will. Sad, though. Really sad. I was talking about Hollywood. That's why the Hays Code was enacted, if you remember. The Hays Code was that Catholic and Southern Protestant movement to make sure Hollywood wasn't giving degeneracies to the people. That was why it existed. The Hays, yeah, the Motion Picture Production Code, often called the Hays Code. It spelled out what was acceptable and unacceptable, and it lasted till 64. It said 68, but really 64. It limped on for another 4 more years, which is sad. But you know, the Crusaders made the mistake of, yeah, Dank Frank says, oh, someone got busted for talking about the chosen people. That's what I was just saying. But the Crusaders made the mistake when many of their wives and women had died on the crusade. They married a lot of locals, and a lot of them weren't even Christian. A lot of them were heretics, like legit heretics, and a lot of them were Jews. They married a lot of these Jews, and then they returned, some of them returned to southern France, Provence. And southern France, if you look at the maps, just look at a map of the Albigensian heresy, and look a map at the Huguenot heresy and Protestantism in France in the 15 and 1600s, and you're going to find southern France has the highest concentration of heresy in the French nation. And that was the place which had the heaviest importing of Jews and heretical Christians. You know, I think there's something to be said there. Southern France lost its place. You know, Raymond of Toulouse, the guy that is on the First Crusade that we talk about, his own grandchildren would fall prey to heresy. Boy, are we going to have some fun times through history once we're done with the First Crusade. Not saying it's not fun, but afterwards we're going to talk about some dark and devious things, and I will put those sources. You retards that want sources. I will put sources for my book so you can look it up and enjoy them. And all their bliss and glory, okay? So you know I'm not just bringing out the fake fire here. I only bring real fire. Coming down like the fire of the Holy Ghost, man. Just purging, and enlightening. You know, I said fire. That kind of reminds me of Eliseus, the one biblical prophet. This is historical. I could talk about it. He was on the mountain, and the king wanted to arrest him and kill him. So he kept sending wave and wave of troops up the mountain. And every time Eliseus asked God to help him, and heavenly fire came down and struck and burned his attackers. And they sent wave after wave of soldiers to arrest the prophet Eliseus. And he's like, nope, heavenly airstrike, F-13, napalm, you know, blasted them. Charbroiled pagans, man. Gotta love it. Nice and crunchy, just like they will be when they die and go to hell. Ooh, yeah. Drooly, yeah. You get the people that are like, can I have a source for that, please? Can I have a source for Eliseus' heavenly airstrike? It's called the Bible, baby. You better get used to it. Better read it. Read the Dewey Reams Bible, okay? When people, they talk about which Bible's the best, and blah, 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 blah. The Protestants literally took out books of the Bible. You want to talk about history? They took out books of the Bible. And then they said, King James is the best. We just took out a few pages of the old one. Get the King James, KJV. When I see that in a hotel, you know what I do to that King James Bible. That thing is... No, you want to be getting a Dewey Reams Bible, which is a translation of the old Bible into English and with all the books. Has all the books in there. You're going to want that. Don't you want to read the Bible with the full message of God, not just some heretic that wanted to start his own religion because he couldn't stay in the state of grace? Because religion was too hard, was it, Luther? Was the Catholic faith too hard? Was it making you sin because you were weak? Well, maybe you shouldn't have gone to a religious life that demands from you an exemplary existence, huh? Maybe you should have done that, Martin Luther. Yeah, this Martin Luther character, quite a retard. You know, he was smart, though, but he was a retard. He, called upon the Peasants' Revolt in Europe, which was huge, and then sided with the lords who put it down. So he basically asked for a revolution, and then sided with the lords. Not a nice guy. You know, not a nice guy when you think about it. Watch. Well, let's look up Table Talk. Table Talk by Martin Luther. You guys ready for this? Let's see if Google allows us to find the nasty things that are in here. I'm looking it up right now. Because this book is blasphemy. Oh, here we go. Yeah, buddy. Let's talk about this, huh? Let's lay it on the line. Because, boy, you're going to want to hear this. This article here was written by Church Militant, and it says, Luther's blasphemy. Christ committed adultery. The followers of Martin Luther don't deny that he said Christ committed adultery 3 times. Luther said this. They do debate, however, if he was drunk or just being sarcastic when he said it. Wow. The founder of your religion was joking about Christ committing adultery. Now, whether that's a joke or whether he truly meant it, that's blasphemous. That's blasphemous. Whoa, you think Jews are bad? Luther is saying these things. Boy, my blood boils. How much more betrayal can I take, Tone? You know, that's what I'm feeling like. Luther's blasphemous statement is recorded in what historians call Table Talks, a series of comments on various topics that were recorded by his followers. In one such comment, Luther remarked, quote, Christ committed adultery, first of all, with the woman at the well, about whom St. John tells us. Was not everyone about him saying, whatever has he been doing with her? Secondly, with Mary Magdalene. And thirdly, with the woman taken in adultery, whom he dismissed so lightly. He did not dismiss so lightly. He said, go and sin no more. Continuing with Luther's blasphemous quotes here. Thus, even Christ, who was so righteous, must have been guilty of fornication before he died. This is how much of a coon brain horn dog Luther was. This is how religion and revolutions against the church are started. It's because people are impure and they don't want to listen to rigid purity. They always want to find a way outside of the constraints of the Catholic faith. They just want to say, oh, Luther said sin and sin boldly. That's what he said to his followers. Sin and sin boldly. And if it is a joke that he said that Christ did in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, I'm sorry, Lord Jesus. But if Luther did say these things about Christ and then said, go and sin boldly, you can kind of imagine he thought Christ was an adulterer and a fornicator. Put two and two together, the way he treats these things. In the gospel, our Lord denied, of course, ever having committed sin. In John 8:4-6, Christ rhetorically asked the Jews, which of you can convict me of sin? Protestant historians don't deny that Luther ever said such a horrible thing. It's actually well documented in Protestant-approved sources. They do debate over the context of such a statement, but admit they have no pat answer to explain it. Yeah, what are you going to do, right? How are you going to explain that in any context? The fact that Luther uttered such a blasphemy, however, doesn't seem to change their opinion of the man. Catholics everywhere, and this is the Vatican as well, are joining them in praising Luther and his so-called Reformation. The Vatican put out a statue of Luther. Let's listen to this, okay? It says, on Reformation Day, and this article was from 2017, it's years back, but they still did it. On Reformation Day, the Vatican announced that it was releasing a commemorative stamp of Martin Luther. Martin Luther. You know, is this Catholicism? You know what else they did? They also released a stamp with Philip Melanchthon. Philip Melanchthon, or whatever that heretic's name is. In the background of the stamp is a town of Wittenberg, and in the foreground, Luther and Melanchthon kneel at the foot of the cross. It is pictured above. Okay, what is happening? What is happening to the church here? Brillian in the chat, real quick, says, who is the man in the thumbnail? That's Tancred, the character that we talked about in the history portion of the show. Our live stream went down, and I had to start a new one because the electricity in my house is a monster. Let's go back to this, though. The Vatican says in the stamp, quote, with a penitential disposition, kneeling respectively on the left and right of the cross, Luther holds the Bible, source and destination of his doctrine, while Philip Melanchthon, theologian and friend of Martin Luther, one of the main protagonists of the Reform, holds in hand the Augsburg Confession, the first official public representation of the principles of Protestantism written by him. Bruh. This is the Catholic Church saying that it was a reform. You know, the Protestant Reformation, if you're a Catholic, and if you're just a normal person after hearing what Luther said about Christ fornicating and sin boldly, it is a black spot on Christianity. It's a revolt against the order of the known world at the time, which was Christ-based. You can't just go saying about these things. This is what comedians do all the time. We can say dirty things and anti-Christian things because it's a joke. It's just a joke, man. Chill. It's a practical joke. No, it's not. Screw your right to free speech, you son of a gun. Okay? Like, in the proper country, Martin Luther's head would have been chopped off. His tongue would have been branded. Let's continue with what this article says, shall we? Pope Leo X declared Luther a heretic in Exsurge Domine and described him as one whose faith is notoriously suspect and in fact a true heretic. You can read this in a 1520 papal bull. A papal bull, mind you, is sealed by the papal approval and stamp, which carries weight. So if Luther is declared heresy in 1520, why, 500 years later, just about, are we going back and saying that he's great with the Bible? While it was first reported in January that the Pope was giving a stamp to Luther this year, the Vatican waited until Reformation Day to unveil it. Oh, how nice! Mainstream Catholics are trying to make sense of it. Below is Bishop Michael Hickborn, who runs the Roman Catholic Lepanto Institute. He said, This is the Vatican stamp commemorating Martin Luther's Revolt. The stamp shows Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon at the foot of the cross. Next up, the Arius stamp, the Lucifer Calatarnus stamp, the Muhammad stamp, the Nestorius stamp, the Simon Magus stamp. How about the Judas stamp? Well, you know what, Michael Hickborn, I never know who this guy is before, but what about that? Like, we're commemorating a heretic here who denounced Christ? Who literally made fun of him, blasphemously, and said sin and sin boldly. So why don't we put one up there of Caiaphas and Annas, okay? Why don't we build them a statue with a menorah, you know? Why don't we? What's the point anymore? This is what happens when your institutions and your church gets infiltrated. This is what happens when you don't have objective truth anymore, when everything's subjective and blah, 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 and we have to get along. There should be ecumenism. We should get along. Not saying we shouldn't get along politically when we can, because Christ does want a convergence of people who share similar values. But I'm sorry, someone who says Christ was a fornicator and is the founder of a religion and a movement called Protestantism, I am not going to treat him as a religious equal. I am not going to compromise. No siree. Sunki says, what do you think of Pius XII? I love Pius XII, one of the greatest popes of all time. A man of great wisdom, he knew many languages, he was very devout. He prepared the church for the oncoming age of technology, which was just awakening with the TVs and the screen and the music. Pius XII is, well, I love him personally. And if you want to read a great book about Pius XII, you should read Crown of Glory. Crown of Glory is a biography about Pius XII, about his life, and it's been approved by all those who knew him and, well, experienced the greatness of that pope. So buy Crown of Glory. Certainly worth your time. Let's continue here with this Luther thing. Oh my goodness, though. See what happens, though, and the church says blah, blah, blah. Said, last week, Cardinal Gerhard Moeller, former prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, called attention to the fact that many who laud Luther know very little about the wrong-headed things he taught and the negative effect his revolt had on Christendom. The cardinal noted, there are so many voices that speak too enthusiastically of Luther. Too enthusiastically? How about enthusiastically at all? Not knowing exactly his theology, his controversy, and disastrous effects of this movement that has represented the destruction of the unity of millions of Christians within the Catholic Church. What more can I say? Martin Luther Day. Yeah. Most assuredly, right? I'm really going to, well, here's another one here. You guys want to continue about the blasphemies of Luther? You guys ready for this? Put some words up in chat if you like this. If you guys like this, I'm going to continue because boy, am I loving this. Boy, does this need to be said this day and age when religious fervor and clear-cut designation lines need to be laid out. I love talking about this. We're going to continue with the blasphemies of Luther. This is historical. We are talking about history here, okay? So we're going to continue it up. So, the Protestants say Luther was a tool of God to correct the church. I invite you to see whether a man who wrote the blasphemies listed in this article can be used by God for anything good. Who was Martin Luther, eh? Who is he, huh? Founder of a religion without sacraments or an ecclesiastic hierarchy? A man who despised the values of pious and penitent works for our salvation? He was an apostate monk who made heretical statements concerning Catholic doctrine, which can, and I will, be reading right now. Okay, you guys ready for this? We already read the one about Christ fornicating, which is terrible. His next is, don't you think that drunk Christ, having imbibed too much at the Last Supper, bewildered his disciples with his empty prattling? This is apparently a leader of a religious movement that from Luther to Billy Graham and beyond love? and aspire to be? Saying that Christ was acting like a drunkard at the Last Supper? What's going through your mind? Huh? People? Ugh. What a sicko. You know what else he said? You know what else Martin Luther said? He said, Deus est stultissimus, which is Latin for God is very stupid. He said, certainly God is great and always good and merciful, and all that one can imagine in this sense, but he is stupid. God always acts like a madman. In personal notebooks written by Luther, recently discovered and studied by Father Theobald Beer, who published a book on the topic, the heresiarch affirmed that Christ is simultaneously God and Satan, good and evil. Luther professed a Gnostic and heretical dualism. The Protestants ignore these writings of Luther, and the few preachers who know them hide them. Wow, you kind of seeing some things here like, whoa, we don't want these things. You know what? The scandals in the Catholic Church, the Renaissance popes, the Babylonian captivity, the errors of bad priests, I will always never try to hide. The Catholic Church has its problems because it has fallible men working for a divine institution. There's bound to be abuses. That's why the spirit of reform is constant. You don't hide them. Popes had progeny. That's terrible. Okay? You don't hide these things. You try to do better. The Council of Trent reformed Catholic teaching. Priests became better picked. And it was only after Vatican II that a huge onslaught of homosexuals started invading, which I can get into in a later date, on why they started invading. Okay? But certainly people that cover up the mistakes of their founders, their holy founders, they are not good faith actors. They just don't want to bend to the authority of a church because it means sacrifice. It means putting away the things that you enjoy, your lustful passions, your intakes. Let's keep reading here. Luther blamed God for all crimes of history and affirmed that Judas had no option but to betray Christ, just as Adam did. For Christ had already determined who would be sinners. That's called predetermination and predestination. He's going against free will there. He wrote some things on the Mass. Now, I know some people that are probably listening are Catholics or Orthodox. I could even have Protestants. But if I offend your ears, I don't care. But anyway, the Mass is one of the holiest, it is the holiest prayer of the Christian churches, of Catholicism, and of you Orthodox. Let's see what he said about the Mass, huh? Luther said, when the Mass will be turned on its head, we will have turned the papacy on its head, because it is upon the Mass, like a rock, that the papacy is completely supported with its monasteries, bishoprics, colleges, altars, ministries, and doctrine. All this will tumble down when this sacrilegious and abominable Mass tumbles. On the offertory of the Mass, the middle prayer before the consecration, and right after the Gospel and Credo, he wrote, then follows that abomination which is called the offertory, where everything in it expresses oblation. On the canon of the Mass, where the bread and wine is turned into the Christ's body and blood, he said this, the abominable canon is a collection of muddled lacunas. It makes the Mass a sacrifice. Offertories are added. The Mass is not a sacrifice, or the action of one who sacrifices. We see it as a sacrament or a testament. Let us call it a blessing. The Eucharist, the table of the Lord, or the memorial of the Lord. The memorial of the Lord, huh? While on the tactic to install the Protestant Mass, he said, to securely and happily reach our goal, we must keep some of the ceremonies of the Old Mass, so that it will be accepted by the weak, who would be scandalized by too hasty changes. Well, guys, have you seen this happen in the Church's history and in the history of revolutions? How sometimes they move too hastily, too quickly, like the French Revolution did? Like the Russians did? Many people that liked the Enlightenment suddenly became anti-Enlightenment because of the French Revolution, because of how wicked it was. The priests and nuns that were murdered. The good nobles that were murdered. And put in their place vile pigs of Masonic origin who want to have every single form of licentiousness free. Writes a man, yeah, you want to enslave man by militarizing their vices. That's what they wanted. How about the Russian Revolution, huh? Same thing. People that were pro-socialist suddenly lost lost the taste for it when millions of people were killed by it. When Russia invaded Europe and Poland was the one who stood in its way, why do you think Poland didn't want to become communist, huh? Maybe, like, smelling the blood across the Vistula is all you need? Germany, too. They move too quickly. However, in an institution like the church, which is meant on authority, moving too quickly means nothing. It's very sad, the scandal that's been caused. On the priesthood, Martin Luther said this: "What a madness to want to monopolize the priesthood only for a few." For Luther, the priesthood was shared by all the faithful. Does that mean the women, too, that they're making deacons? They do this? They do the deacon ladies helping the priest? That fills me with such anger and dread. Now we have every Protestant church has some woman acting upon it. This is what happens when you don't lay out clear-cut advice on what should be done. Same thing with the Constitution, on a different scale. They were too ambiguous, they're too vague, they don't say which God is good, they just say God, and now Satanists think that they have a right to worship freely. When they don't, they worship a demon, not a God. But since ambiguousness takes over the Constitution, I guess he is a God. See what happens when everything's ambiguous? As people become more immoral, and Protestantism reaches the Enlightenment, you have a perfect storm here of historical proportions, where religious free thinking enters subjectivity, and now everyone thinks that, I'm a genius, I can say and believe whatever I want, and people have to put up with that. On Luther's own behavior, he said, "From morning to evening I do nothing and am drunk. You ask me why I drink so much, why I speak so loquaciously, and why I eat so often? It is to fool the devil who comes to torment me. It is by eating, drinking, and laughing in this way, then some more, and even by committing some sin, that I challenge and despise Satan." Whoa! Trying to replace the thoughts the devil suggests with others, as for example, thinking with avarice or a beautiful girl or in a drunken stupor. Otherwise I'd be too furious. He's saying, I replace bigger sin with smaller sin. Oh, what a saint you are, you big fat retard. He doesn't even run away from temptation. He just drinks, eats, and acts like a pig, so he avoids bigger sins. Venial sins and small offenses and breaking the law multiple times usually ends up in you becoming not too concerned about breaking bigger laws. And that's what happens. You don't just, control yourself with your sin. You don't just get to stay complacent and peddling the water. You're either getting pushed back in the current or you're swimming against it. And he thinks that just by committing just a little sin, it's a little sin of gluttony. You ever see how fat Luther became at the end of his life? He thinks he's going to be saved. Otherwise, he said he'd be too furious. He probably had a guilty conscience, too. He had a guilty conscience that was eating at him. He couldn't handle it. People that usually say you should sin a lot are usually the people that have a guilty conscience. And the only way they can feel better is if they pervert the whole world. Misery loves company. Sinners love company. Sinners hate seeing people be virtuous. They make fun of them. They laugh at them. They think it's impossible. And they think it's impossible because in their mind they've rationalized that it's so easy just to have fun. Maybe I'll make it to heaven if I just say, Lord, Lord, God believes in me. Blah, 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 blah. Martin Luther also said, "I had up to 3 wives at the same time." 3 wives. 2 months after he said that, he married a 4th one, a nun. Okay? He was a fornicator. And the only reason why he probably said those things about Christ was to make his conscience feel better. Do you have any idea now of the founders of these religions? Do you think they were good people? Do you think by taking out books of the Bible that they deemed unworthy for the Bible was a good thing? Are they still our brothers? It's madness. Simple madness. Martin Luther, 3, 4 women committing these egregious acts of sin with. And I still think that he should have a stamp and a statue. And I still think I should say, they're my brothers in Christ. What they've done to the church, they need a strong talking to. On the inside and the outside of the church, that's for certain. On the church, Martin Luther said this, and I'll wrap it up with this. He said, if we condemn thieves to be hanged and burglars to the scaffold and heretics to the fire, why should we not use all our weapons against those doctors of perdition, these cardinals, these popes, the whole sequel of Roman Sodom, so that they will not corrupt the church of God? Why should we not wash our hands in their blood? He was calling for a religious genocide of the church's hierarchy. Now, there were popes that were immoral, but there were also popes after them that worked very hard to get rid of that. Pope Paul IV, Pope Pius V, Pope Pius IV. There was a court jester in the Vatican at one point. Can you believe that? How immoral the papacy had become? It's not about which Bible is the most true, guys. It's about one is true, okay? One that has all the books and a good translation. Because remember, translations are important. Language is important. It decides what words are. Language kind of makes up who you are as an ethnic. It really does.